Welcome to the Byways of Southern Vermont. This is a collaborative work of GNAT-TV and Alsing Productions. I'm your host, Greg Cutler. We're going to explore some of the back roads of Southern Vermont where you often find its most characteristic places and people. We're in the Range Rover, which has been generously loaned to us by the Land Rover driving experience at Equinox Resort. I think you're going to enjoy this. Hello, and welcome to the Shires of Vermont Byway. I'd like to introduce you to the area and show you some of the sights and things that there are to do here. This part of Vermont is steeped in history, probably more than any other part of the state. So let's begin our journey.
Our story takes place in the southwestern corner of Vermont, which also happens to be Bennington County. That's where we'll find the Shires of Vermont Byway. We'll start out at Vermont's southern border where US Route 7 takes us northward through Pownall and into Bennington. Here it crosses Route 9, the Molly Stark Byway. From Bennington, we'll jump onto historic Route 7A to go through Shaftesbury, Arlington, Sunderland and into Manchester, where it intersects Route 30, the Stone Valley Byway. While the term Shires may bring hobbits and far-off worlds to mind, the word really derives from an ancient usage in the United Kingdom defining a ruled or managed area. The Shires of Vermont Byway connects the southern and northern shires, which meet just below Arlington. Historic Route 7A is named for Ethan Allen, the leader of the Green Mountain Boys, who successfully seized Fort Ticonderoga in 1775, the turning point for the American Revolutionary War. So let's begin our journey. We'll start at the state line and drive north through Pownall towards Bennington. A mile in from the state line is a building we had to learn more about, the Green Mountain Racetrack in Pownall.
I'm with Doug Saunders here at the Pownall Racetrack. Doug's been here for over 31 years and now oversees a lot of new developments that's happening. But tell me about the history of the track, when it opened. And
we opened in 1963 with thoroughbred horse racing. We went up until 1975 with thoroughbreds and trotters. Then we switched over, the Rooneys from Pittsburgh bought it, and we switched to greyhounds, which we ran until October of 1992. And we were the first track to run on Sundays in the nation. We're pretty much in the middle of nowhere, but we are 1 mile from Massachusetts. We're about 3 miles from New York. So we drove from all over.
People came from
we used to get a lot of Canadians too.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing.
And aside from the Rutland track, this was it, right?
This was it. This is it. They ran at the Rutland Fair.
Yeah.
They ran horses, but other than that, we were it.
And then Saratoga was built.
Yeah. Well, Saratoga was old.
Yeah.
They were one of the first tracks in the country.
How did they affect what happened here?
Well, what they do is they run during the days.
Yeah.
And then the people would come over at night to watch us race.
Yeah.
So that basically helped us, you know.
Right. It's an amazing building, and I don't think it's coming down anytime soon, judging from the way it's built.
No.
Thanks a lot,
All right.
Doug.
Then I spoke with Chick Postian to learn about the racetrack's future.
We are at your project, really, and tell me a little bit about what's happening.
Well, when I first came down here, I was invited by 3 of the owners to come down and see what we could do because they were going to try and develop it. And when I saw it, I said, this would be perfect for energy.
Yeah.
And they first thought I was a little loose, and then when we started talking about it more, they said, you know, you might be right. So we came up with Southern Vermont Energy Park, and we went online, and that solar field is one of the...
It's amazing. And that is, how much energy is the solar field putting out approximately?
It's producing, it's probably one of the number ones in Vermont right now, producing. It's the same, there's so many that size, and it's 2.2 megawatts, which goes into the substation 2.5 miles up the road and goes into the grid, and they say it'll do between 300 and 400 homes.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's just the beginning.
Just the beginning.
You've got an amazing thing going on with Clark Museum. Tell me a little bit about that.
They came to us about leasing some land to do mixing of soils for their gardens, their lawns, and everything for their expansion down there. And it's been going on for almost 3 years now. And they do all the mixing right here on site. The soils come in from all over New England, and they blend them for different gardens.
Fascinating. And in addition, on the weekends, you're apt to see some incredible model airplanes. And I'm not talking about this size. I'm talking about,
up to 12 feet long.
Giant row here. Yeah.
12 feet long, some of them.
Yeah. You're also talking about having some concerts and some entertainment here, because it's a perfect. You've done that in the past, or
yes.
That's happened here in the past. Or Lollapalooza was here.
32,000 people were here for Lollapalooza.
It's incredible.
And we've done car shows, we've done circuses, we've had rodeos, we've had all that, but we'd like to concentrate more on the music, and we're looking for classic, country stuff like that, classic rock and roll country. There'll be 3 new stages. They've already given me the specifications of what they want.
Yeah.
They're trying to line up the country groups right now because they think country is going to be the big one for here.
Right.
Because, we have within less than 50 miles, we're within 30-something major colleges and universities, and they want to attract these young people here.
Right, yeah, so you're well on your way. Well, thanks a lot for spending some time with us.
Thank you for coming, and we appreciate you coming down.
Good luck. I don't think you need it. I think great things are happening.
Let's continue our journey north, and on our left, we see the Hoppy Valley Organics, where they've had the brilliant idea to grow hops.
I'm with Peter Hopkins here at Hoppy Organics Farm. Is that?
It's actually Hoppy Valley.
Hoppy Valley.
Organics.
Organics.
Home of organic hops.
Real hops.
Real hops to make beer with.
To make beer. And we're standing amongst the hops.
Aren't these beautiful?
How did you get started in this business? And tell me a little bit about the reason and all of it. Go ahead.
I've been growing hops in the backyard just as a landscape plant for 3 or 4 years. I'm not a home brewer, but I just kind of like the looks of them growing way up the 2nd and 3rd floor of the house. And a friend and neighbor stopped by one day, and we're having one of those back of the pickup truck conversations, which is kind of like the farmer's boardroom. And hops came up, and he says, "What's a hop plant look like?" And so we went to the back of the house, and he looked up like that and said, "Do you want to grow these?" I said, "Sure, do you?" He said, "Yeah." A couple of weeks later, we're in business.
That's amazing.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
When you had them in the house, were they growing up the side of the house? You didn't have them on this?
No, I had them up just like this, growing up to the 2nd and 3rd floor. They grow 25, 30 feet. So this is the first year, and so the height isn't quite there because everything that's above ground is feeding the roots downstairs for next year's crop.
You've got an acre and a half approximately here.
Just about, yeah. We have
hops.
560 roots in the ground, which makes us a pretty good-sized commercial grower for Vermont.
That's pretty exciting. And what's the season? Is it early spring, or is it?
It's 120 days with full sunlight, so it's a long season crop. You don't want a late frost. You don't want an early frost.
You're growing 5 different varieties of hops?
We have 6 now.
6.
Yep, we have Cascade, which is probably the largest used variety of hop.
Right.
Chinook, Centennial, Nugget, all fairly common to brewers.
Right.
And then we have these guys, which we're calling Kingdom Gold. These roots I dug up this spring from a remote location. Nobody has made beer from these since the 1880s. We have no idea what variety they are, but we're going to get them tested to understand what their brewing values are. Oh. These things have survived 140 years for a reason. And the result here is that they've grown 2 or 3 times as high as the rest of these, and they produce 2 to 3 times as many hop cones as the others in their first year in the ground. So we're very excited about the potential there. The other variety that we have, we dug out of an old garden in Berkshire County, Massachusetts, where they'd been growing wild, and the last guy to make beer from them was an old hippie in the 1950s, and so we're calling them hippie hops.
Hippie hops.
Actually, because they have this wonderful pink O tint to them. So
you told me that you can drop hops into any beer, really, and it changes that beer dramatically just by dropping in one of the...
It does. The industry calls it dry hopping.
Dry hopping.
So we have to call it sort of the same thing. But
I've never heard of dry hopping, and I'm going to be a big fan, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, let's try that.
Yeah, let's give it a try. So we're going to do something called dry hopping.
Dry hopping.
Okay.
And what we're going to do is take some of these guys,
yeah,
bust them up Toss them into your
Just
beer.
toss them in. I can get, now do we do two?
Yeah, two would be
Okay,
good.
two is
I'm going to
good.
give you three.
All right.
You get three, I get two.
All right. Just toss them in.
Yep. That.
It looks like a garden in my
I know.
fancy American beer. And we stir it around?
Smush them around a little bit.
Okay. All right. And there we go. Now, do we wait?
Yeah,
Is it
why wait?
important to wait? Why? You're
Cheers.
looking up your old address.
There you go.
All right. Wow, that's a substantially different beer.
Beer, isn't it?
Right away.
Right away, and as you go down a little bit further, those little yellow things release themselves and makes it even.
I have never ever done this before, and it's truly amazing.
In North Pownall, we pass by a roadside farm, the Armstrong Farm. In autumn, they're famous for their pumpkin display. Continuing on, we begin to enter Bennington. The town of Bennington, by population, is the largest town in southern Vermont and the sixth largest municipality in the state. The byway continues straight through this downtown intersection, but we're going to go left onto Main Street to show you some points of interest. Our first stop off the byway is Hemmings Motor News. Hemmings Motor News moved to Bennington, Vermont in the late 1960s. They have 5 publications for car enthusiasts. Bennington is home to their old-fashioned full-service Sunoco station and the Car Lovers store. In the store, you'll find hundreds of automotive products. It also houses a small cafe. Around back is Hemmings Car Museum, which houses 25 renowned automobiles from days gone by. The museum is free, and it's open 7 days a week, June through October. And almost across the street, we find the Bennington Museum.
Robert, we're in the Bennington Museum, and it's spectacular.
Well, the Bennington Museum is perhaps an ancient organization. There are indications that it was founded as early as the 1830s as the Bennington Historical Association. But the real founding of it, we've always measured, is with the creation of the Bennington Battle Monument in the 1880s, and that's when this organization really got off and running.
You're famous for one particular
Oh,
artist.
yes, we're very famous for Grandma Moses. Grandma Moses, of course, lived and worked right in the area, just across the New York border. She's one of the great local artists, and we have the largest collection of any public institution in the world. Almost 50 works by her. But we're famous for other things. A great gallery at Bennington related to the Battle of Bennington, with muskets and bayonets and drums related to the Revolutionary War. Also famous for Bennington pottery, the great Norton potteries through the 19th century, which made salt glazed stoneware here. A very large collection of that. And then Vermont decorative arts and paintings.
We're standing in a new gallery. It's going to be a permanent gallery.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about this.
So this gallery is not even 2 months old, and it looks at Gilded Age Vermont, at a couple of things, the manufacturing that went on in the Bennington area and in Vermont as a whole, but also the consumption, you know, the lavish consumption. We have a lot of Tiffany glass here in this gallery, great paintings, that sort of thing. We're doing a number of edgy things here. We're putting together this incredibly muscular object. This is the Wasp Motor Car, made right here in Bennington, a hand-made motor car made in the 1920s. Only about 20 of them were ever made. 2 only exist now. It's called the Martin Wasp. Martin was the guy who made them. The Wasp, think of that as the brand name, like the Hornet. Flies fast with a little sting, you know, that sort of thing.
Right.
We knew that to have this large three-dimensional object work with flat paintings, we had to have a lot of other three-dimensional things here.
Right.
So a lot of glassware sculpture, but also things like this SD organ made in Brattleboro. I got to say, it's a beautiful object, and we wanted one. We were hoping to have one. It was on our wish list, and it walked in. It's a recent acquisition. We've had it not even 6 months.
Unbelievable. I think it works very well. Well, let's take a little stroll through history.
Okay.
And you spoke earlier about the all of the Revolutionary War pieces that are here, but also we've got a Civil War installation right here between 2 very interesting galleries. This is Southern Vermont and the Civil War.
This particular gallery focuses entirely on one figure. This is General Ripley, who grew up in Rutland. He led the Union troops into Richmond when Richmond fell at the end of the Civil War. But more than that, I mean, it's a great installation, and it commemorates the 150th anniversary of Gettysburg, which you could see as being the heart, the high point, or the low point of the Civil War.
Yeah.
But what I would say, too, is that, you know, you and I were talking about encountering history or artifacts through the digital era. You see them on a screen. It's just not the same. And what a museum can afford, amazingly, is it puts you in the same space with real objects. And that's this evocative emotional connection. Right. So here you have the actual swords worn by General Ripley. I think that's amazing.
Just terrific. And now we're going to continue on into the mid-20th century with another new installation here at the museum, which is pretty fascinating because it's something I had no idea that this was something that had been going on. This is some of the most significant artists in this period of modernism, somewhere between, say, 1950 and on up to 1970s.
Exactly.
Was taking place here in Bennington.
Here in Bennington.
You have an incredible collection.
I'm going to say flatly and proudly that this is the moment when Vermont really led the nation in the arts. There were titanic artists working here. Bennington College, in many ways, was the center of this activity. Paul Feely, we see a great Feely behind you, was the head of the art department there, and he was this amazing galvanic figure. I didn't know him. He died in the 1960s, but it's clear that he was very attractive, brought other people around. Helen Frankenthaler across the gallery was one of his students. She graduated in 1949. Other people who worked here, Ken Noland, Jules Zalitsky, David Smith, who in many ways invents modern steel-welded abstract sculpture, was also hanging out here with all these guys. And I should make the point that this is all abstract art. It's abstract painting, abstract sculpture, but it's a moment when Bennington led the nation. All of these artists were working at the edge, trying to figure how to go further in the arts.
Well, it's just amazing, and there really is something for everyone here at the museum.
I think so.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very
welcome.
welcome.
Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for coming.
All right.
As we leave the museum and continue a short distance uphill, we find ourselves in Old Bennington. It is here we have the Old First Church, the oldest Protestant church in Vermont, completed in 1805. It was founded by Vermont's earliest settlers seeking religious freedom. Their first gathering was in December 1762. Behind the church is an old graveyard known as Vermont's Sacred Acre. Poet Robert Frost and several members of his family are buried here. Then we continue on up the hill to the Bennington Battle Monument.
There are two ways to the top of the Bennington Monument. One is the newfangled elevator way, the lazy way, and then there's the 412-step stairwell, which I'm going to attempt right now. Normally not open to the public, but except for 2 days, and they've let me do it today. So here we go. $3.99. Whew. $3.90. Oh, busted. Oh well. Hey, let's have a look around now that we're at the top.
It is the tallest man-made structure in Vermont. It's said that on a clear day, you can see 3 states from the top. To the west is New York, to the south is Massachusetts, and looking north and east, you'll see Vermont.
I'm with Ann Bugby here at the Bennington Monument, and tell me a little bit about the history, both the battle that occurred and then the monument itself.
The battle was a very decisive battle in the northern section of the Revolutionary War. It took place between the Battle of Hubbardston, which took place in July 7, 1777, was the only battle actually fought on Vermont soil, and Saratoga, which took place in October of the same year. General Burgoyne, who was in charge of the British forces, was coming down from Montreal, and his aim was to cut off the New England states from the Continental Army. But he needed supplies. As he was coming down, he had a long supply range. He had over 8,000 soldiers. The colonists were sabotaging his supplies. They were doing everything possible to prevent his coming down. Burgoyne sent a unit of Hessian and Brunswickians, Royalists, there were some Indians in there, French Canadians, over to capture these supplies. He had been told, or Burgoyne had been told incorrectly, that Bennington was full of royalists. They were really supportive of the king. And that the only thing to protect them was this ragtag unit of Continental soldiers that had been the rear guard up at Hemmings, because the information was wrong. General Baum, who was in charge of the unit, made his encampment at a place called Bennington Heights, and that was actually in Walloomsac, New York. Now, it's called the Battle of Bennington because Walloomsac at that time had maybe 5 or 10 families. Bennington was the largest town in Vermont at that point with 1,500. So people knew Bennington.
Right.
Burgoyne knew Bennington. The King of England knew Bennington, but nobody knew Walloomsac. So that was why it's called the Battle of Bennington. The upshot was that the Stark and his militia, and the militia were like the Minutemen. They came in from the fields, they fought, they went home. They defeated the British, but what they didn't know at the time, they were celebrating their victory. The battle started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It raged for 2 hours. Stark called it one continuous clap of thunder. But they didn't realize that Burgoyne had sent Bremen with about 800 troops as reinforcements. The Continental Stark's men were tired, they were hungry, they'd been fighting. All of a sudden, here comes this other reinforcement, but almost like the Lone Ranger. Seth Warner and his Continental Green Mountain Boys came in. They had been in Manchester. They arrived on the spot, sent Bremen off, and won the day.
Tell me a little bit about the monument itself.
This was almost the second Battle of Bennington. There was a lot of controversy. But finally, in 1884, the Vermont legislature formed the Bennington Battle Monument Association. They wanted it placed here because this was the site of the storehouse. And the storehouse was nothing more than a great big barn. This meant, if they were going to do it here, this was the center of town, that they had to remove buildings, which caused a certain amount of controversy. The person really, the vocal force behind this was Highland Hall. What he did in order to get the design that he wanted was to ask the Vermont legislature to take this property, and there were about 10 properties, by eminent domain. They gave him $10,000. They ripped down the buildings, including one called the State Arms, which was not around at the time of the Revolution, but where they had celebrated the battle and where they had meetings and all of that sort of thing, which again caused another controversy. And they came up with the idea of this monolith. They needed something to stand out against Mount Anthony. They laid the cornerstone in 1887. They completed it in 1891. At the time, this coincided with the centennial of Vermont becoming a state.
How tall is the monument?
Oh, it's 306 feet, 4.5 inches to the tip of the star.
Well, you've given us a lot to digest, and I recommend that people come and meet you and continue to ask you some questions about what goes on here, because you certainly know a lot about the history. And also take this in, because it is a wonderful place to visit, and it's very exciting to go up to the observation area by the elevator. And then the surrounding grounds are beautiful, and I thank you very much for spending some time with us.
Well, I enjoy it. Thank you.
All righty.
As we continue our exploration around Bennington, we visit a few more sites. Unique to this town is Bennington Potter'S, which is the contemporary version of the Norton pottery we learned about in the Bennington Museum. Where else can you get a good look at some white-tailed deer? Well, right on the byway is a small park, Veterans Park, and a fenced-in area with lots of deer. This is a popular spot to stop with children. There's a new brewery in town. On Saturdays, you can visit and have a free tasting. We thought we'd share our visit to the brewery. It's a small operation, but the beer is quite good. It's here that Christopher Maine started commercially brewing and selling under the label of Northshire Brewery.
Chris, how did you get started here at Northshire Brewery? I know we're right in the process of brewing.
Yep.
So we won't take up too much of your time because we don't want to mess up a batch. But when did you start, and tell us a little bit about it?
And about 10 years ago, a friend of mine and I started home brewing, and every time we brewed, we expanded our equipment and the types of beers we made, and we were brewing it maybe 4 times a week. And it was something I really enjoyed and couldn't get enough of.
The brewing part or the actual brew itself?
The brewing part. I enjoy the brewing. I don't mind the brew at all.
I like the brew too, actually. I like your ale. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
What's happening right here? I'm confused. This is where it starts, and then it moves over to the fermentation tank?
Right. This is the brew house.
Yeah.
And in here we have a tank of hot water underneath this tank. Up here we have what's called the mash tun, which is it's a tank with a false bottom in it with grates, and we mash in with cereal grains, barley mostly, and hot water. We make a big oatmeal consistency mash up here. It sits there for about an hour, and what it's doing is converting all the carbohydrates in the grains into sugars for the beer. After we're done converting the sugars, we then take the mash and separate the wort, which is the sugary liquid out of it. We pump that into the kettle, and at that point we boil the wort for an undetermined amount of time, depending on what it is we're making. We also add our hops or any other adjunct, sugars, chocolate, something depending on what beer we're making. We'll boil in here from anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes. After that, we'll cool the wort down, and we'll send it into a fermenter where we pitch the yeast and wait for the fermentation to go.
That's wonderful. It's an amazing operation. You have an office just off of this space where you have some tastings every
That's
once
right.
in a while?
Yep.
When do you do those? Is it a weekly?
We're open every Saturday from 10 to 1, where we just allow people to come in, and then we also do tastings and tours by appointment.
And you can get your product throughout Vermont and other points?
Yes.
South and west? Where do you go?
We're all over Vermont for our bottles and our draft beer. We're also in Berkshire County and Boston, Massachusetts, and we're in all of Rhode Island.
Well, it's fantastic, and I really appreciate you showing us around today. I'm going to go into the tasting room now and taste.
Sounds like fun.
All right. See you. We're in the tasting room, and you have a brand new product. Tell us a little bit about it.
We have it's a new beer called Sicilian Pale Ale, and it's a hop-forward IPA that's has Sicilian blood oranges in it and ancient farro grains from the Fertile Crescent. And it's a citrusy, hop-forward beer, like I said. It's not real bitter, but it does have 80 IBUs, and it's a little bit higher in alcohol, making it a double IPA.
Oh, very good.
Would you like to try some?
I'd love to try a little bit. You don't have to ask me even once, as the crew knows, to make sure we get Northshire Brewery in front. First, we'll just check out that color, which is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, it gets a lot of color from the blood oranges.
That has an amazing. You get the orange right away.
Yep.
Before it even just here right away.
Right.
You can pick it up. It's great. Very smooth.
Yep.
Would I say even sort of a creamy?
It's got a creamy head to it.
Yeah.
Which is something we're looking for. It's a very hoppy beer, but hops can bring a lot of different flavors and aromas to a beer. And I really enjoy a citrusy hop character, so the oranges really kind of round that out and balance out the bitterness, giving it, I think, a crisp, clean flavor.
It's very crisp. It's got a great finish. It's got just enough for me personally. Yep. I don't like to go too far over the edge in the hop department, but this is really, really good. I'm thrilled.
Well, thanks. We worked hard on it for a long time.
Well, congratulations. It's a winner.
As we work our way north of Bennington, we come across the first of our covered bridges in the area. There are 5 covered bridges in the Shires of Vermont. At one time, there were 14 bridges, but many of them were destroyed in the 1927 floods. All of the bridges in Bennington County are of the same structural design, Town Lattice Truss. They were painted red using iron ochre because of its inexpensive cost in the 1800s. While they do provide travelers with protection from the elements, covered bridges were really designed with roofs to protect the structure and travel bed of the bridge. Today, all 5 bridges in the Shires are open to automobiles, but are one lane only. 3 of the current bridges are just northwest of Bennington. All 3 span the Walloomsic River. The first bridge we come to is the Silk Road Bridge. Its original name was the Robinson Bridge, built in 1840. It's the shortest bridge of the 5 in the Shires. Our second bridge is the Paper Mill Bridge, named for the neighboring paper mill, which was one of Vermont's first. The bridge was reconstructed in 2000 after its roof was vandalized. The third bridge, also just north of Bennington, is the Henry Bridge, named for the family that purchased it from the original owner, James Breckenridge. This is the site of the 1771 conflict between New Yorkers and the local settlers. 10 Ike, a New York sheriff, attempted to arrest Breckenridge for lack of cooperation with New York during the New York-New Hampshire land struggles. When the Green Mountain Boys showed their force and strength, New York officials backed off. Moving up into the North Shire, we have 2 more covered bridges, one in Sunderland and the other in West Arlington. The Chiselville Bridge in Sunderland was built in 1870, replacing a log stringer bridge used by locals and the Underground Railroad. It spans the Roaring Branch Brook, and it's placed on 40-foot rock cliffs, saving it from the 1927 floods. It gets its name from the Chisel factory, which used to be nearby. Our 5th bridge is perhaps the most loved. The West Arlington Bridge was built in 1852 and spans the famed Battenkill. Located at the West Arlington Green, it abuts the chapel on the green, the West Arlington Grange, and the home of illustrator Norman Rockwell. Because of its picturesque setting, it's one of the most portrayed covered bridges. This bridge also is a favorite destination for swimming, fishing, canoeing, and tubing. As we come into Shaftesbury, we come to what was once the home of Robert Frost. Shortly after we filmed here, the house's woodwork was painted red, returning it to what it was when Robert lived there.
We're at the Stonehouse Museum, the Frost Stonehouse Museum. Carol, I know that you had a lot to do with getting this started. Give me a little bit of history. Tell me what.
Frost lived here in the 1920s. He was in his mid-40s when he came to this house. This picture of him over the fireplace is a very famous picture, and it was taken right on the other side of this wall. And when you look out the window, you see the same driveway. That's 7A going by. It was a dirt road back then. And that stone wall that's on the other side of the road is still over there. He lived in Shaftesbury until 1938 when his wife died, and then he moved away from this area. We don't have it set up as a period house. Things have changed in the house. We have a few pieces of furniture which did belong to Frost, and some of it was in this house.
Right.
But we're not trying to present it as a period house. We're trying to get you in touch with Frost. As I always tell people, this is a house of literature, not furniture.
Wonderful.
This is what we call the Stopping by Woods room. It's where Frost wrote Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening on a hot June morning or July morning in 1923. And he'd been working all night on another poem, that was Frost's habit. He wrote at night, and he looked out these windows. This is east over here, and he noticed, my gosh, I've worked all night. The sun is coming up. And it must have been about 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:30. And with that, he went out and got a breath of fresh air. And he loved telling the story of how he wrote this poem, so we sort of know what the deal is. And he went out to get a breath of fresh air, came back, and wrote Stopping by Woods as though it just came to him in an hallucination. And he said, I was auto-intoxicated, and that this burst of creativity came over him. And this is the original manuscript of the poem, and it shows you how he altered it. And he says he pretty much wrote it out in one stroke.
Yeah.
But then it does reveal that he made some changes. But, that's editing, and that's what he does. He plays around with the words and so forth. And the only thing that stumped him about this poem was sort of how to end it. And so he thought about that for a while. It took him a couple of weeks, and then he came up with repeating the last line. With miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
Standing in the room where it all happened.
Right.
Well, thank you for showing us this. Wonderful.
Good.
Continuing northward, we pass by the Galusha homestead. Jonas Galusha served with the Green Mountain Boys and fought at the battles of Hubbardton and Bennington. He also served 9 terms as governor of Vermont. Venturing on, we come upon Lake Shaftesbury State Park, a small but beautiful lake with hiking, swimming, non-motorized boating, picnicking, and camping available. Moving right along, we cross into the Northshire and into Arlington. Arlington has its place in history too. Several of the Green Mountain Boys lived in Arlington and East Arlington, including Seth Warner. Vermont's first governor, Thomas Chittenden, lived there, making it the capital of Vermont in 1791. Beyond that, the town is known for its artist residents. Among them are Dorothy Canfield Fisher, a best-selling author and a promoter of the Montessori method in the United States, Carl Ruggles, a tonal composer and prolific painter, and Norman Rockwell, America's beloved illustrator of everyday American scenes. The famed Battenkill runs through Arlington, West Arlington, and eventually west into the Hudson River in New York. Riding down the river in an inner tube is a popular way to spend a hot August afternoon. Back on the Byway, we leave Arlington and cross into Sunderland. It's here we'll find Skyline Drive up to the top of Mount Equinox. Driving the 5.2-mile road, we'll travel through the northern mixed hardwood forest that the mountain is known for. The summit is the highest peak in the Taconic mountain range at 3,848 feet elevation. Skyline Drive is open May through October, 7 days a week. Before reaching the summit, visitors enter the Saddle, a ridgeline which offers 360-degree views. From here, you can see Lake Madeline and the Carthusian Monastery on the western flank of the mountain. Continuing around, we look east, and on a clear day, you can see into New Hampshire. Traveling on, we reach the top, where we're greeted by the new Bruno Scenic Viewing Center. Here, the Carthusian monks share their beautiful, peaceful mountain. Their order came to the United States from Chartreuse, France in 1950, but settled at their present location in 1970. Also in the Visitor Center, you can learn about the history of Mount Equinox, the Skyline Drive, and the buildings that have come and gone. Several attempts were made to make the road reaching the top, but it wasn't until 1947 that a road was finally completed. In 1953, Skyline Drive was widened and paved. It's said to be the longest privately owned paved toll road in the country. Credit for building the road goes to Dr. Davidson, a wealthy retired chemist who owned many acres on Mount Equinox. From the top of the mountain, we have beautiful views. Looking east and south, we can see beyond the Green Mountains and into the White Mountains of New Hampshire, south to the Berkshires in Massachusetts, and Vermont's Great Valley below. Looking in the opposite direction, we can see into the Adirondack Mountain Range in New York, and it's been said that on a very clear day, you can see all the way to Mount Royal in Canada to the north. Heading back down the road to the toll house at the base, it's important to take your time and to use your car's gears to maintain your speed rather than your brakes. Perhaps you guessed that we're approaching the last leg of our journey. We are. But there's still much fun to share with you. We're coming into Manchester, the last town on the Shires of Vermont Byway. Manchester seems to have a renewed spirit lately. With the new double roundabouts, there's been an ease in traffic and a beautification in the center of town. Known for its shopping, the town also has many fine restaurants and inns. Manchester is a four-season vacation town with a resident population of just over 4,000. It still has that small town feel. It's easy to get around by walking or biking. Our first stop in Manchester is Hildene, the summer home of Robert Todd Lincoln. We drove the 1-mile drive up to the house. On the front lawn, we started our visit with Paula Maynard as our guide. I asked Paula about the history of Hildene and the meaning of the word.
In 1864, during the Civil War, Mary Todd Lincoln, the president's wife, wanted to get out of Washington. She could come by rail to Vermont, and she indeed liked the White Mountains and the Green Mountains. And that year she came to the Green Mountains, and she brought with her her young son, Tad, and she was met here by Robert Lincoln, her oldest son, who had just recently graduated from Harvard Law School. They stayed at the hotel. They made a reservation to bring President Lincoln back to stay in the summer of 1865, and he was assassinated in April of that year. So President Lincoln never got to Vermont, but because his son did, it's very significant how life unfolds, and indeed 40 years later, Robert will return and buy 500 acres here. And Hildene actually means hill and valley with stream. And so as you look at that house, it's actually a perfect shot. To the west, you see the Taconic mountain range, of which the highest peak is Mount Equinox. To the east, you see the Green Mountains of Vermont, which rise up here and go towards Canada. And in the Great Valley of Vermont below, you see the Battenkill River, a famous fly fishing river, which empties into the Hudson in New York. So the name is indeed perfect for this beautiful place.
There's a new fun development behind me. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yes, we're continuing to grow, and as I said, we're focusing each time we create a new venue on property, it has to have to do with one of the values that we are trying to share for the 21st century with people who visit here. This one happens to be about conservation and the importance of wetlands, which have been very much in the news lately given flooding that's gone on in many parts of New England. The wetlands are actually a sponge. We have a lot of them because we have a mile of Battenkill River, which borders valuable wetlands, as well as an 80-acre meadow before it. The problem in the past has been we're separated by a road, so we've never been able to get to that. If you look over here, you'll see it along the right, sitting right on top of the wetlands. It's 600 feet long. It will be ready for the public hopefully next year. It's not ready now. We will be doing some educational courses there with children.
It is a boardwalk.
It is a boardwalk, and you're actually
boardwalk.
Floating. You are above the wetlands. It's probably the only place I've ever been that when you're in the middle of it, you couldn't have gotten there any other way other than maybe wading in a great distance, and certainly not even by kayak. So it's a very precious ecosystem. There are things there that maybe many of us have never seen because they've been happily out there, and they will remain that way because we're above it all.
Right.
So any flooding or decrease of water, it will rise and fall with it. We're very excited about it, not only for our visitors to see it, hopefully sometime next year, but for children, school programs too. There's a brand new school program called Wild About Wetlands.
That's terrific.
We're actually walking past the Roberts Observatory right now, which has a very powerful telescope with a Bergier lens for which you can see the sky unfettered because there's nothing in its way. And we have used it in the past and hope to again use it for stargazing and looking at the skies.
Wonderful.
So Greg, here we are at the formal garden, which was actually given to Mary Harlan Lincoln, the lady of the house, from her daughter Jessie in about 1907. And it's famous for its look as it's a European parterre garden, but it's actually designed like a stained glass window. And the best place to view the elements of the window are actually from the second floor sitting room, right over the back entrance or exit, however you prefer to look at either side of the house. And the privets are the lead in the window, and the flowers are the glass, and the various colors are in groupings. So you might have purples and blues, whites and yellows in another, and so on all the way out. Right. And looking from up there is absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful this time of year, but in the spring, in May and June, we're actually famous for our peony plantings. Many of those peonies do go back to the original plantings with the roots having come from Paris, France, because we didn't have them in the United States. And then we have about 1,000 blooms, 20 varieties of peonies that bloom from late May into early June, and the garden smells absolutely gorgeous. So that's a very popular time for people to visit Hildean's formal garden. So Greg, here we are at the Pullman car Sunbeam. The Pullman car was brought here because we really wanted to tell the story of Robert Lincoln, who had been president of the Pullman Palace Car Company at the time when it was the greatest manufacturing company in the world, and also at a time when it employed more African Americans than any other position in the country. And so the story of the Pullman car is interpreted through history over a 100-year period from the Emancipation Proclamation to the Civil Rights March on Washington in 1963, which many of us are celebrating now. And so the interpretation on the wall of the platform wall is talking about the company of Pullman, of which George Pullman was president, and then Robert was president, Robert Lincoln, the people that rode on the car, as in the Vanderbilts and others, and then the people who made the car successful, the company successful, the Pullman Porters. Right. The fourth voice is our voice as Americans, and can we engage in discourse about periods of history that have a lot of paradox in them and are very interesting. And so we're very excited about how this has been received and how people are participating. We're also excited to be a site on the new African American Heritage Trail, and this is a prominent point on that trail.
Truly remarkable, and it's an incredibly good-looking exhibit.
We finished our visit to Hildean with a stop at their agricultural center, where they make their very own goat cheese. Strolling amongst the pastures, we looked back to enjoy yet another fabulous view. The nanny goats came to greet us and charmed us with their curiosity. Our next visit was an awesome adventure.
Morning, Greg. Welcome.
Yeah.
Here at the Land Rover Experience Driving School at the Equinox Hotel. We're going out today to do some work in our Range Rover on our 80-acre course. It's a purpose-built course with both man-made obstacles and natural terrain that will be instructing you on how to approach safely and with good off-road technique today. Back to drive, because remember we're going to go uphill and maintain our momentum when we go uphill. So come to that brake pedal now. Slow, steady brake movement. Not adding so much brake that we compress the suspension. And working the brake smoothly forward. We can see ahead of us, again, the known versus the unknown. The known is that we can see the trail on the left side, so let's use that side tilt and open up the view in front of us. So off the brake, first gear, we don't need the brake or the throttle through here. We have our speed control from first gear and hill descent. We'll go high up on that side tilt, right? We need to get a view of what we can't see. Right. We see what we see, which is the known. Work with what that is and start turning the vehicle around to the right. Now we can make a decision about which direction we're going to go. Right. And we're going to turn all the way around to the right, a complete U-turn. Okay. That small amount of momentum up the next hill in front of us. Transfer the weight forward, out of the throttle, back to the brake. Rinse, repeat all the way through. It is indeed a slow motion roller coaster.
Going deeper into Manchester, our next stop is a little more relaxing. We're at the American Museum of Fly Fishing.
Hi, Greg. Welcome to the American Museum of Fly Fishing.
Hi, Kathy. Thanks for having us.
Come on in.
Kathy, tell me a little bit about the history of the American Museum of Fly Fishing, how it got started, some of the people who started it, and then we'll have a look around.
Great. The museum was founded in 1968 here in Manchester. We've always been located in Manchester. It was founded by a group of very passionate, enthusiastic anglers who felt that the history of fly fishing was an important story of American history to be told and preserved. Yeah. Some of our founding board members include Lee Perkins, who owns the Orvis Company,
family owns it.
And Arnold Gingrich, who is the founding editor of Esquire magazine, was also one of our founding board members.
Oh, that's great. And so you've had many exhibits over the years, but I know that one recently was really popular, and there's even a book about it, The Graceful Rise, is that correct?
Yes, A Graceful Rise featured 50 women and their contributions to the sport of fly fishing, and it covered 5 centuries of women's involvement in the sport. Yeah. And we had a wonderful exhibition. We had a great opening with Joan Wolfe and some of the other well-known women, and we've sold out of a book which was written to accompany that exhibition.
I saw that exhibition. It was great. Well, let's go in and take a look at the Lee Perkins Gallery, where there's a brand new one, The Wonders of Fly Fishing, the who, what, where, why, and when. And this is a really amazing transformation from that last exhibit. And that's what's so great is things are always changing, and the look and feel is always being updated. So it's something that people should not just come once, come several times during the year and see what's going on. What about this exhibit?
Well, this exhibit is great because it gives a general overview of American fly fishing. It includes the people, the places, the events. You can even come and see the world's largest tarpon caught on fly here in the exhibition right now.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
We're outside at the casting pond here at the American Museum of Fly Fishing, and we're standing on a pretty interesting platform. Kathy, tell me about this.
This casting platform is one of the earliest casting platforms designed in Vermont for people with disabilities to come to our pond and go ahead and cast a rod.
Well, that's great. And you have events with different organizations?
We do. A few times over the past few years, we've hosted Project Healing Waters Fly Fishing, which is an organization out of the Washington, D.C. area who bring veterans to different locations to learn about fly fishing and use fly fishing as a rehabilitative vehicle.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks again.
Well, thank you. And the only thing we ask is that people catch and release our trout.
Okay.
Right next door is the Orvis Rod Factory, which is open for public tours at 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. Our tour guide was Greg Cutler. Our first stop is at a display of the bamboo milling area. Orvis Fly Rods was started by Charles Orvis, making the very first bamboo rods. They still make split bamboo rods with material imported from China. It takes about 60 hours to complete a bamboo rod. Next, we move on to the graphite department. Greg showed us the carbon fiber scrim, which becomes the outer shell of the rod. The machine applies the scrim to the mandrel. The pivoting motion of the roller provides a well-defined spine on the rod, and that's what's needed to create a steady rod that will perform best. Here we're looking at the tip section, which already has the scrim applied. Next, a cellophane coating is wrapped onto the rod, which after being in the oven is stripped off, leaving a texture on the finished rod. From there, they go into the oven, where they're fired for 4.5 hours. The scrim softens and becomes liquid. When cooled, it settles into a strong and flexible resin. Following that, the mandrels are pulled out, leaving you with a hollow rod. The next step is to run the rods through a wet sand process, leaving them with a surface that will accept paint. But before they're painted and assembled, the top of the spine of each rod section is identified. Then the sections are fitted together, creating matched pairs. For roughly 25 years, the cork handles have been manufactured by another company. Then we head into the finishing department. Many of the line guides and threads are put on by workers in their homes, but here we have a woman in the shop working on a repaired rod with a custom thread. Next, the rods are inspected, and if approved, they go to be epoxied. The rotating drums allow the epoxy to dry in a uniform layer. At the end of our tour, we looked at some finished products. Even if you don't fish, you're sure to enjoy this experience. It's just downright fascinating. Wow, what a great journey we just took. From the southernmost point of the state of Vermont, traveling northward for roughly 36 miles. We visited nearly 30 sites, and there are dozens more we didn't have time for. Of course, we had to leave you with some surprises. There's something for everyone, from dining to the arts, history to technology, sports to shopping. We think this is the greatest place on earth to visit, but of course, we're a little partial to it, because we live here. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you on the Shires of Vermont Byway. That's a take.